The story is set 10 years in the future in the kingdom of the Eastern Federation, where an entire nation is destined to be devastated at the hands of the Five Great Sins, an absurdly powerful group that literally fell from the sky, laying waste to everything in their path. And just like that, using their combined powers, they annihilated the entire kingdom, leaving nothing but a massive crater where it once stood. But to stop this terrible future from happening, our story's hero has a seriously risky plan. He's just gonna become the patron for the very people who are supposed to become the villains. Of course, our MC had no idea this would blow up in his face quite so spectacularly. But let's start from the beginning. In the study of a fancy mansion, after being tortured by 78-hour work weeks, our MC realizes he's woken up in the body of some noble in a fantasy world. To make matters worse, he couldn't understand a single word in any of the books. Sure, holding one upside down probably wasn't helping, but the real kicker, he didn't have a single special power to his name. And right as he's whining about it, his butler calls him to a banquet, which our guy mentally rebrands as afternoon snack time. And to top it all off, after he stuffed his face, a maid comes by and asks if he needs help with his bath. Are you kidding me? This is so worth it. Not even 2 seconds later, he's surrounded by a couple of lovely ladies washing him. Apparently, being a rich dude means you can be completely useless and get pampered for it. He has absolutely no clue where he is, but hey, he's not complaining. This is amazing. But to crash his little royal party, one of the maids mentions that the young masters will be back tomorrow, and he has to ask who they even are. She tells him they're Leo Antonio, giving him a weird look, probably wondering why her boss doesn't know his own family. And immediately, the name Palacio starts ringing a bell, a very familiar and unpleasant bell, but he can't quite place why. This sends him into a panic, and he sinks down into the bathtub, freaking out the maids, and then it hits him. The penny drops. He's in Psychedelia, a game he used to play to kill time in his past life. A pretty cool turn-based RPG he'd sink all his free time into. The problem is, in this game, when the 5 sins, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and envy, kingdom, the nobility, the whole darn city basically went down the drain, and among the ones responsible for this whole mess are none other than the Palacios, the house of Leo Antonio, basically the undisputed kings of disaster. They're the main villains of one of the first side quests, and now our MC knows exactly how deep in the soup he is. He instantly remembers the quest where the player had to investigate the Palacio house and all their crimes. Staring up at the gigantic mansion, he just can't believe it. The Palacios are the first ones to get wiped out by the 5 sins, and he's been reborn as a disposable side villain in this very house, Alan Palacio. The poor guy just flops onto his bed. When faced with certain doom, a steady 9-to-5 job suddenly looks a lot more appealing. So he cries because what's the point of all this luxury if he's going to be gone in 10 years? A fate worse than a late paycheck. And to make things even worse, he doesn't even have a single cool power. But then, a brilliant idea strikes him. Even without powers, he knows the future, which basically makes him a prophet in this world. With this knowledge, he decides he's going to simply eliminate the root causes of the world's destruction, and to finally get to live his peaceful, noble life, he's going to have to deal with the 5 great sins, which should be doable, seeing as they're all still just kids right now. 2 months fly by. Alan is in his study, having just rescued the orphans who would cause him so much trouble in the future from some shady research facility. His knight Evan reports that a girl named Yuchia has been put in charge of running the orphanage. Alan praises his skill and his good eye for things, eye being singular of course since the poor guy's only got one, but because of his boss's deadpan expression, the knight can't tell if he's being praised or just being made fun of, so Alan forces a bizarre smile and says he looks forward to working with Ivan, which just makes the knight even more uncomfortable, and thinks about how his master's emotions used to be so easy to read. Now, it's like he has to practice them in front of a mirror. The knight thanks him for the compliment. Ivan is actually a pretty rare character in the game, and a genuinely honest one, which is why Alan recruited him. Ivan then asks if this whole operation was just to save that one girl Yuchia, adding that he can understand why. Even for someone like him, who'd been a mercenary for a long time, it was clear she was no ordinary kid. When he went to rescue her, she was trapped with several other children in a dark cell, all of them in terrible shape. But honestly, he couldn't understand how someone as strong as Yuchia let herself get captured like that in the first place. So he asks why they didn't just bring her to the mansion, since there's no real benefit to leaving her at the orphanage. Our MC reveals that while it might seem like he's just neglecting her, it's all part of his grand plan. Yuchi Bludia is a non-human who made a contract with an otherworldly being in exchange for power, and in the future, she would become Wrath, one of the 5 great sins, and take out thousands of people. Alan figures that if she just grows up in peace, she won't turn into Wrath, so he's pretty much solved that problem, but he can't exactly tell his employee that, so he just mumbles some nonsense, leaving the knight completely clueless. In the end, he just puts on a serious face and says it's not the right time to bring her over. The knight is pretty surprised by this answer and genuinely wonders if maybe it really isn't the right time. time. Alan then asks him to keep it a secret and to make sure the orphanage has enough funding. He then hands Evan a letter to give to Yusha, and the knight asks if it's something important. Alan just says it's to see how she's doing and to help her calm down a bit after everything she's been through, and with that, the loyal knight takes the letter and rides off on his horse to carry out his master's order. From the window, Alan watches him leave, thinking that even if he's not sure the letter will help, it's worth a shot. But the real purpose of the letter was a line he'd heard in the game, a phrase meant to calm non-humans. In the game, an archbishop tried to calm Wrath down, but his attempt failed miserably, and because of that, the girl unleashed her dark power and destroyed everything around her. The thing is, it was already way too late to use the spell, because she had already completely transformed into a monster. In the game, that's when the battle would start, but now, Alan thinks he can change that fate. So he stretches and decides that now that he's dealt with one target, it's time to move on to the next. Honestly, he thinks it's kinda silly to try and befriend a monster with a single catchphrase, but it's always been hard to understand the way those fanatics think, so who is he to judge? Meanwhile at the orphanage, Evan delivers the letter to Yusha, who reads it in silence. The knight is in shock. The amount of mana he can feel coming from the little girl is unbelievable. He finds her to be a strange and emotionless child as a dark aura surrounds her. Yusha then asks the knight if it was really Lord Alan who sent the letter, and suddenly, she unleashes a terrifying aura and asks why Alan doesn't want her around. This sends Evan into a full-blown panic, because manifesting mana like that should only be possible for a master. Then Yusha reads the line, "It is not yet time," and Evan remembers his master's words. Stuttering, Evan tries to explain, repeating what his master said about waiting for the right time to act. Yusha seems to understand, hugging the letter immediately, interpreting it as a promise made just for her. The knight, on the other hand, is just speechless, watching all that sinister energy vanish into thin air. The girl floats with a creepy smile on her face, thinking she understands exactly what Alan meant. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Alan wraps himself in his blankets, thinking he's managed to buy himself a little more time, and he sleeps peacefully, feeling like the moon's got his back, already thinking about his next target. The next day, a book falls on our guy's head while he's doing research in the library. Right after, Evan arrives and reports that they've rescued the second child he mentioned. Our MC asks if the child was treated well, and the knight confirms the rescue was a success. But at that exact moment, someone bursts in, shattering the library door, and a hulking guy storms in. The aforementioned Tonio, second son of the Palacio family, also known as the local drug lord. The older brother starts making fun of Alan for being illiterate and pretending to read a book. Being provoked like that, our hero wonders why the original Alan ever put up with this treatment. All he wants to do is plant his fist right in Tonio's face. But in the end, he just throws himself on the floor and says he'll leave the library so his brother can use it. Seeing this, the older brother stumps on his back, saying that Alan knows his place. Until suddenly, a knife comes flying through the air and slams hard into a wooden bookshelf, and someone at the door calls them both noisy insects, leaving Tonio stunned. This is Leo, the big boss of the city's nightlife, the eldest son, who tells them to get lost because he's not in the mood to paint the floor red this early in the morning. So in the end, the two brothers are stuck together, basically competing to see who'll make the 6 o'clock news first. The thing is, in the game, the Palacio family was taken out pretty quickly, but in real life, their power was way bigger than Alan expected. Basically, the two disgusting brothers were fighting over who would become the head of the family. One ran the city's red light district, and the other was the head of the drug trade, and Alan knows he can't mess with them, so he decides to get the heck out of there fast. As Evan helps him up, Alan says he's just gonna keep playing the part of the weak and useless brother, all for the sake of his own fragile happiness. He throws himself onto the sofa, and the knight mentions that the second child they rescued didn't seem normal. Our MC was so tired he could barely think straight, but he was still curious about the strange look Evan was giving him. Turns out, the knight was wondering how Alan had found out about the slave market and the experiments, but he gets distracted watching his boss struggle just to stay on his feet. Changing the subject, however, the knight says that Alan is a bit of a weirdo. He went through all that trouble to rescue a kid just to dump him at an orphanage. And our hero gets his employee's logic in thinking the boy is a bit of an outlier, but the problem is, the kid isn't just an outlier, he's basically Armageddon. See, the game's story takes place in a union of several nations, with the main one being the Kingdom of Callian, and the person they just saved from the slave market was the game's second boss, the god Macallian. After being sold into slavery and mistreated, he became the very embodiment of sloth. And then he annihilated entire kingdoms in the worst ways imaginable. And that part of the story was so brutal that even the players were freaked out by the scene. But contrary to his title, he was a very driven guy who paid his debts in kind, which is exactly why Alan sent him to an orphanage. But changing the subject again, Evan asks him about the letter to Yusha, and our hero confesses that he might have stretched the truth just a little in the letter, basically telling her to look after this slightly unwell child he sent over, referring to Macallian. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, the boy was standing standing alone under the moonlight until Yushi appeared before him, calling him over for a serious talk. And after taking a good look at the boy, she says that he's broken, something that makes her curious, especially when she notices some strange marks on his hand. So she asks if that was the work of the black goat, which catches the boy completely off guard. And right after that, she congratulates him because despite all that, the great moon chose him as its champion, telling him to feel the power he's been given and to let his potential be unleashed. And with a wicked smile, she extends her hand and promises that if he is loyal and follows her orders, he will finally have his revenge. And now, she's finally going to send her reply to Alan, and holding the letter, she decides to start her response with a very gentle greeting. Sometime later, at the palatial mansion, Ivan bursts into Alan's office, shouting that something terrible has happened. The knight is desperately trying to deliver some news about the second master. Even Alan is shocked when he hears it. That piece of garbage Tonio bit the dust, and surprisingly a decent crowd shows up for his funeral. Not that anyone actually cares about him. His own father is sitting there with two working girls, just waiting for an excuse to leave. The ladies by his side are looking a little bored and hungry, which only makes our hero wonder at the sheer nerve of showing up high with two smoke shows like that to his own son's funeral. But his focus is more on how strange it was. Tonio dying from an accidental fall. That's not how it happened in the game. In the original game, Leo was screaming with joy, celebrating that he'd finally gotten rid of his brother after all these years. He was found by Alan unable to hide his sinister grin. But either way, our hero just needs to worry about dealing with the 5 sins, and just like that, a year passes since the funeral. With the succession problem solved, Leo absorbed the drug business, and with that, peace reigned over the county, and things got a lot quieter around there. Meanwhile, Alan and Yucha became pen pals, which he found pretty useful. Reading her letters, he thinks about how kids are so sweet on paper, and even sweeter when they're far, far away. And as he's reading, he also notices that the list of sponsors for the orphanage has grown again, which he finds interesting. Then even informs him that the information guild called, they found a lead. This makes our boy breathe a sigh of relief, thinking he's finally going to find the third boss. So far, everything seems to be going smoothly, and it's a super peaceful night for the two of them. But suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the air, along with the sound of splattering blood, and the scene changes to Margot, where Leo's drug distribution center is located, and two men are commenting on how generous the Palacios are, until they stumble upon a horrific scene where all their comrades are down, and in the middle of the bodies, one of the goons realizes his own hand is moving on its own, guiding a knife straight toward him. One of the men who had just left the building screams for help, but he can't stop his own body from being controlled and taking him out, and one by one they're all eliminated. One of the goons, still alive, begs for help, but it's already too late for him. And watching all of this is the boy he had adopted, admiring how many people had joined the ugly puppet show put on by Macaulay, the sin of sloth, and after he's finished, he asks Yushia, who's standing beside him, what the point of all this was. This makes her wonder if he feels sorry for their targets, but Macaulay immediately denies it. But the girl explains that this helps lay the groundwork for the return of someone important, and with a smile, she says the place can't look messy when a certain someone arrives, and Macaulay understands. So the two of them combine their powers and prepare the way for their master. An intense light covers the city as Yusha says that everything is going according to plan. The blue moon then shines in the sky, revealing their master's sword. The scene cuts, and we see the place has been completely purified by the duo. 2 years have passed since our hero became pen pals with Yuchia, and even shows up, running through the mansion, desperately looking for our guy. He finds him in the backyard and collapses from exhaustion, announcing that the 5th target has also been successfully sent to the orphanage. During that time, our MC also saved the remaining 3 sins, and with that, he's managed to rescue all of them. And as a reward for Ivan, he offers him a snack since he looks completely wiped. Finding the 3rd sin was tough, but with Alan's knowledge of the game, everything worked out. Our MC thanks Ivan for a job well done, and even asks if their tasks are finished, and Alan confirms that they are, looking incredibly relieved that it's finally over, which makes his knight wonder why his master doesn't seem happy with the outcome. So, our hero forces a smile and insists he is smiling, but Ivan doesn't really buy it. Alan then flops down on the grass, enjoying the sun and the peaceful blue sky. He lies back with his hands behind his head and thinks that he never expected everything to go so smoothly, since the bosses from the game, Psychedelia, had suffered horrible pasts filled with pain and torture, and because of that, they became the 5 sins. But Alan found them before all that happened. The chances of saving them all were slim, and he was afraid they might already be broken, but luckily, he managed to gather them all at the orphanage, giving them a new hope. Lying on the grass, Ivan hands him the letter and says things at the orphanage are going well. Before, they seemed like broken dolls, but now they're much more cheerful and happy, and Alan is pleased, since if that's the case, he won't need to hire a babysitter. Honestly, he didn't expect Yucha to be she's so good at taking care of the kids, and it makes him wonder if she actually likes being at the orphanage. Ivan comments that she's a good girl and asks if the letter says anything important, but the letter just says that everything's fine and that everyone is growing up strong and healthy, and our hero is happy to hear that they're growing up well. The knight then asks when he's gonna meet the children, since he's always putting it off. Alan surprises Evan by saying he never plans on meeting them, and the knight doesn't understand. The thing is, their personalities in the game were a nightmare to deal with, and Alan is still scared of them, even though he rescued them before all the tragic events. So he tells Evan that maybe he'll meet them in 5 years. Either way, he needs to learn how to protect himself in this dark fantasy world. Luckily, he has a talent for magic, but changing the subject, Evan asks if he's ever heard of the Blue Moon, but Alan's never even heard of them, so it's up to his knight to explain that it's an organization that's gotten pretty famous for dismantling criminal rings. Our guy says that if he's never heard of them, they'll probably disappear off the map soon enough, and Ivan warns him that they even take out nobles, so he was hoping Alan would know something. But upon hearing this, our hero gets serious and orders Evan to sleep in the room next to his. The scene then changes to a dark night at a mysterious, secluded building, where the weekly meeting of the Blue Moon organization is underway. With a cold expression, Yuchia takes the lead and asks about the situation in the north. Then a cat-eared girl named Seolrung starts talking with a smile. She's the sin of pride and says she took care of all the slave traders. The girl says they never even saw who hit them, and then compliments her own outfit. And Rin, the sin of greed, finishes the story, saying their bodies were melted. She then reports that she also finished her job in the south. Right after, Raiden reports that he took care of Avalon's human experiments, and with a sinister smile, the sin of misophobia says he turned them into mincemeat. Yuchia is very pleased with the results and says that everything will go according to E's will. The group comes together because they exist for the sake of the Great Moon and to serve their master. However, she announces that it seems they have a problem, and she doesn't understand how. Makalian then shows them a dangerous written order he found during the cleanup in the south, and Yuchia is furious at the order she reads on that mysterious paper. The two guys get tense seeing her reaction. The other girls, Seolrang and Rinny, are equally terrified by the energy Yuchia is releasing. The paper reveals a plan to slowly eliminate our hero after the count's passing. Burning with rage, the sin of wrath crumples the paper because she won't let anyone lay a finger on her master. 2 years pass after the discovery of the plan, and we see the funeral of Alan's father, Count Palacio. Officially, the count's cause of death was announced to everyone as heart failure, but our hero knows it was an overdose and wonders if the Blue Moon has struck again. Meanwhile, other nobles are whispering that the organization attacked last night and wiped everyone out, and Alan notices that people are becoming more and more afraid of the Blue Moon. In the end, the funeral concludes in silence, with no one genuinely mourning the Count's death. As they leave, Ivan seems very concerned about his master's next steps. Arriving back at the mansion, the knight asks Alan what he plans to do now. Evan then finds him packing his bags and has no idea what's going on. Then our guy reveals that they're gonna run for it, which surprises Ivan a bit, but Alan explains that it's not exactly running away, but more like moving. Ivan then grabs the bags and asks if their destination is the city of Rodmill, which our hero confirms, saying he planned to go to this small town south of the county. And just like that, the two of them set off in a carriage to start a new life far away from there. Meanwhile, from the balcony, his older brother watches them leave with a smile on his face. The scene changes to our MC cooking up a nice fried egg sandwich on the griddle, and he seems pretty happy and relaxed, flipping his sandwich like a true culinary master. However, 3 days later, something a little unexpected happens. Our guy is back to attend the funeral of his brother, Leo, which honestly leaves him floored. He can't believe he's back and wonders why Leo kicked the bucket ahead of schedule. And looking at the body in the coffin, he notices he was hit right in the heart. This gets Alan thinking, and he tries to figure out who could have taken out his brother. So he aggressively approaches one of the guards to ask about what happened. The guard gets scared and apologizes for even looking at him, while another guard pulls him away, leaving our MC totally confused by the guy's reaction and what's going on. Seeing the confusion, Even makes his way through the crowd to our guy. Our hero then asks if the knight found anything out, and he hesitates for a moment. Ivan then asks if he was the one who made the Avalon organization disappear overnight. Our MC is stunned by his employee's question, but looking at the reactions of the other staff, his question starts to make sense. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the day the two of them left for Rodmill by carriage. Inside the carriage, Ivan asks if it wouldn't be better for them to go to a city, but our hero immediately shuts that down, saying that Rodmill is the final destination of his plan. His mission was to save the 5 great sins from their tragic fates. That way, he would stop the world from being completely destroyed by them. Instead, they'd live happily at the orphanage. Turns out, Rodmill isn't even part of the main story, it's just some random village, which makes it the perfect spot for a noble to kick back and and live a quiet life, doing absolutely nothing. But Alan just tells his knight he doesn't have any special reason for choosing it, but even isn't buying it. He tells Alan he's not falling for that whole carefree act anymore, so our hero quickly changes the subject, rambling on about how good things are great, which just weirds Ivan out. But while they were chatting, Leo was watching them leave from the mansion's balcony, and he wonders if he should just get rid of our hero once and for all. But he figures it doesn't really matter, since he was planning on poisoning him anyway. Since Alan said he was heading for the border, Leo lost his reason to take him out right now. Still, he wonders if it has something to do with the problems with the Avalon organization. This makes him realize that his younger brother just really gets on his nerves, so he calls his henchman Alman and orders him to follow Alan. However, curiously, the henchman asks if the order is to eliminate our protagonist, and Leo is completely taken aback by the question from his subordinate, who has never questioned him before. He finds it strange because Alman had never gone against his orders before. On top of that, he's just standing there with his hand on his sword, leaving Leo completely confused about his posture. Angry, he ends up shouting that his job is just to obey his orders without complaining. But before he can finish his sentence, the henchman attacks him, driving his sword right through his chest. Leo can't believe he's been betrayed and doesn't understand how this could have happened, while the traitor just says that he enjoys playing war games, and says the game was fun, revealing himself to be Hidan, a member of the Akatsuki. Wait, wrong story. He reveals himself to be a member of the Blue Moon. Hidan reveals that they follow the creed taught by the Great Moon and act on behalf of their master, and he warns that if anyone tries to harm the Great Moon, he's allowed to act on his own. After saying this, the traitor lunges forward with his sword to finish the job once and for all. Then he finishes Leo off, saying that at times like these, he acts on his own without a second thought. The older brother's blood splatters on the ground, marking his tragic end on the balcony. Hidan says he waited 2 years for the guy to give the wrong order and finally expose himself, and Leo threatens him with his henchmen, but the traitor says that Avalon will be gone for good. The Blue Moon member just thinks it's a shame that things had to end this way, and warns that the Great Moon gave him a chance, but Leo completely wasted it. Sometime after all this, in the town of Rodmal, it's a peaceful and sunny day. Our protagonist wakes up happy and declares that this place is a true paradise on Earth. He's enjoying the good life, waking up whenever he wants without a single worry. He eats whatever he wants and shares breakfast with his knight, Evan. He figures this is the real noble life and even jokes about opening his own toast stand. But suddenly, Ivan comes running in and hands a letter to our hero, who upon opening it, gets such a shock that he drops the piece of toast he was eating right on the floor. The letter summons him back because of Leo's passing, and just like that, his piece is over, so our protagonist returns to the palatial estate for the funeral. The servants are terrified of him, which is a pretty weird reaction, and even asks when his master became some kind of shadow mastermind, leaving him even more confused. Our guy sits down to process the situation and thinks this is all completely insane. On the verge of tears, he asks the knight to please explain why he's suddenly become the villain of the story. The knight explains that he's the only one who benefits from his brother's demise and has a perfect alibi. This leaves our protagonist floored as he realizes the logic behind the accusation. Ivan continues, saying that with Avalon and Leo out of the way, there's nothing left to stand in his way, and totally messing with him, calls him the Great Shadow Mastermind. This gives Alan a massive headache. He doesn't even know where to begin to process all of this. He says there's no way an organization exists that could take down someone so important that quickly, and even reveals that the Information Guild has denied the Blue Moon's involvement, explaining that the Blue Moon only leaves a mark, not bodies, but the guys from Avalon were killed by swords. Because of this, the highway to heck has been paved, and Alan understands he's now seen as the mastermind who took out a sword master. Our hero remembers that the Blue Moon doesn't even show up in the game and wonders who else could be responsible for this mess. Meanwhile, at the Blue Moon base, Yuchiya asks if they left any traces behind during the mission, and Rin, the sin of greed, confidently replies that absolutely nothing was left to tell the tale. Beside her, Seolrang, the sin of pride, agrees excitedly while already preparing to show off her weapon, and with a smile she says she only left bodies behind and nothing more. Suddenly, Macallion, the sin of sloth, enters the room, announcing he's back from his mission. He reveals that there are still 486 Avalon soldiers left for them to take care of. Next, Raiden, the sin of misophobia, appears and tells Macallion that he followed his orders, recounting with an insane smile that he sliced all the enemies in half, and Yuchiya approves of the result. With a wicked look, she says it was perfect, and just like that, the great Avalon organization that once dominated the kingdom was completely turned to dust in just 5 days of the Blue Moon's assault. But Raiden comments that the cleanup wasn't perfect, and Yuchiya doesn't understand what he means, so he shows her a file he found with the nobles who were connected to the criminal organization. The young man reveals that the Duchy of Alchia has a very strong connection to the organization. Yuchiya then takes the file and silently analyzes the whole situation, and with eyes red with rage, she replies that they already know very well what she's gonna say. So the other members prepare for combat, showing their powerful auras. Raiden steps forward and says he'll take care of everything very quietly. Uchiha then takes a deep breath, trying to calm down after her outburst of anger, and asks Rin if the Information Guild side of things is completely clean. Rin confirms that it is and that the Blue Moon is handling everything separately, and Michaelian comments that all the guilds act the same way, and this one is apparently being called the Infernal Sword. Uchiha confirms this and warns that this story must not under any circumstances reach that person's ears, and Michaelian explains that since his family attacked them first, it wasn't exactly in order, but the girl says that they are swords, and a sword should not think for itself. Uchiha says the Blue Moon only moves on orders and reminds them that their master knows everything, warning the group to never disappoint him, and they all snap to attention. Michaelian doesn't understand how someone as strong as Uchiha is so afraid of being found out, but he pushes it aside and, taking the file, says he understands the order from his immediate superior. In the end, they do it all for the Great Moon. Meanwhile, our hero passes out from overworking at his desk, which is piled high with papers, which makes him cry from exhaustion and wish he could just slack off, because nobles aren't supposed to work. He thinks that Leo's demise was supposed to be 6 years from now, but everything in the game has changed. Suddenly, a few butlers arrive with more stacks of books and call him Master, and our protagonist wonders why everyone is working so hard when they used to just goof off all the time. But the truth is, the servants are in a panic, thinking he's angry, and have decided to work harder. Alan realizes the rumors have turned him into a shadow mastermind, but all he ever wanted was peace. A little later, while roasting some potatoes, Evan calls our hero over for a chat. The knight is sitting down and says that honestly, he's pretty surprised, because he never imagined Alan would reach the second level of poison magic in just 2 years. He explains that it normally takes 4 years to reach the second level of magic. Our protagonist says he only trained for self-defense because he was feeling a bit insecure, but to do that he needs perfect control of his mana, and he trains a lot. But what good is his power if he's still not at the level he needs to be to hold his own in a fight? Our hero has already tested every type of magic that exists in this new fantasy world, and at first he found it all very exciting and planned to learn more over time. But now that he needs to save his own skin, he's realized his mana capacity is minuscule. Mana capacity is like an athlete's weight class, and his is very. In those terms, when analyzing his condition, his mana is pathetic, but if nothing else works, there's still one other method. But interrupting his thought, Even announces that his invitation to the ball has finally arrived. This leaves him a little surprised, but in the end, he accepts and goes to the ball, which is being held in a gigantic hall filled with well-dressed nobles. Our guy is all dressed up in a formal uniform and looks pretty imposing, and with a sour look on his face, he complains that he's already tired of this party. However, this is the kingdom's regular aristocratic ball, and since Alan is about to become a count, it might be a good chance to network. Our protagonist knows that building connections with nobles is crucial for his peaceful future, but when he tries to greet a guy, the noble gets spooked and runs away in fear. Right after that, an entire group of people simply turns their backs and flees from him, and Evan tries not to laugh, telling him not to get upset, and our guy tries to say he doesn't care, but that's not true. In the end, he was already expecting this and says goodbye to Evan, telling him he'll see him later. He knows everyone looks down on him because his family lacks refinement and is from a lower class. The current Palacio family is known for being a bunch of troublemakers from the East, but Alan didn't come to the party for nothing and decides to use his secret social skill, approaching a woman and commenting that the aroma of her wine is quite unique. With a very intense look, he sniffs the glass and says the bouquet is very distinct. Then he smiles in a bizarre way, since a smile is the most important social tool. The noblewoman is completely terrified by our protagonist's creepy face, so she screams that she'll tell her father to prepare the wine and runs off in a panic. Our protagonist realizes his plan was a disaster, and the other nobles comment that he's worse than his brothers. Ivan holds back a laugh while our hero says the young lady must have just been very shy. The scene then changes, and Ivan mentions that our guy's pile of gifts has grown, and he shows off the luxury items he's received while Alan regrets ever studying about wine. Our protagonist realizes his family's reputation is worse than he imagined, and with the rumors that he eliminated his brothers, our hero has become someone everyone avoids. And defeated, he tells Evan he's gonna get some air while a mysterious woman watches him. She is a very beautiful red-haired woman in an elegant dress holding a glass of wine. The young woman seems very interested in our protagonist's movements around the party, and in the end, our hero goes out onto the palace balcony to sigh in frustration. He wonders where he went wrong when suddenly a female voice calls out to him, leaving him surprised as he didn't expect anyone to talk to him. So he looks towards the door and wonders who the mysterious person could be. The voice then begins to introduce herself, and our hero feels a bit awkward about the situation. She reveals herself as Loria, the third daughter of Duke Alchia, which leaves him completely shocked. Our hero hears the name Alchi and understands the situation, greeting the girl. The Alchi family is one of the 3 great shadow powers in the game P Psychedelia, which means she's not a normal person, and he becomes very suspicious, but our protagonist wonders why he doesn't remember her from the original game, because he's sure she doesn't appear in the game. Meanwhile, the girl decides to be very direct, urgently asking him to lend her his strength. The girl gets all flustered and says that soon she's going to be eliminated, much sooner than she'd like, in fact, and she's desperate for help. With a panicked look, Loria repeats that she needs his strength to survive, and explains that she's the daughter of her father's mistress, and that his condition has gotten much worse. Because of this, her older sisters are going to try to eliminate her to get the inheritance, and this makes our guy understand why he doesn't remember her from the original game. Logically, she was already gone in the game, which is why she never appeared in the story. Now that he knows this, our protagonist refuses on the spot, but she says she's not asking empty-handed, offering half of her family's fortune. But Alan turns his back and decides to leave. Our hero thinks that he sympathizes with her, but he can barely take care of himself and doesn't want to give the girl false hope, so he turns to leave, leaving the girl alone on the balcony of the Grand Palace. And the poor thing looks very sad, watching her only hope walk away like that. Our protagonist, however, continues walking towards the door, and before going inside, he wishes her good luck, hoping the girl finds a trustworthy ally, and so he returns to the main ballroom, trying to forget what happened. From above, a mysterious figure comments that Alchia has approached the Great Moon, and that they should inform the Red Moon. Then Macallion says it's fine because according to their intel, she's the only Alchia with no ties to Avalon. This means she's the only one in the family who isn't on Redon's target list at the moment. Macallion thinks this simplifies everything, as the rest of the family will be eliminated, and Rin agrees with the order. Therefore, they will focus on blocking all information so that the Avalon case doesn't reach the master. Our hero is just standing there in the middle of the ballroom while the 2 members of the Blue Moon watch him from a distance. And while he was wondering if he'd put on some kind of people repellent, the red-haired woman approaches him. Our guy is surprised and thinks he's finally going to socialize with a noble, returning her greeting, but he ends up recognizing her face and realizes she's another one of the shadow players he's seen in the game before, and it dawns on him that no one is going to approach him unless they're bringing trouble. He then bows and formally greets her as Lady Zenonia, who is surprised that he knows who she is, and he replies that of course he knows her, since she's quite famous in many different ways. It turns out that in the Kingdom of Asteria, there are 3 great shadow players who control everything from behind the scenes. The first is the Alchi family, who rule the northern region with an iron fist and a lot of influence. The second is our protagonist's own family, the Palacios, who dominate the eastern region. And finally, we have Zenonia, who is the big shot in the western part of the kingdom and runs the underworld. The young woman introduces herself as Kalia, the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia, and asks if she's really that famous. A strange question, since while the Palacio family is a gang, the Zenonias are a well-organized and dangerous crime syndicate, which sends our guy into a panic because all he wanted were useful connections to live a life of peace and quiet. Still, he compliments her beauty while thinking that he absolutely cannot get involved with this woman. But with a very seductive smile, Kalia says she'd like to talk more with our hero in private, but he politely declines since there are too many eyes on them, and honestly, he just wants to be left alone. The young woman then smirks and says he's exactly as the rumors say. Then she says goodbye, saying she hopes to see him again, leaving Alan completely clueless about the situation. She walks away, leaving our hero alone in the middle of the ballroom full of nobles, confused and not understanding what she meant by that. Then, from a distance, the Blue Moon members report that the information about Avalon has been contained. But there's a new problem, when suddenly Macallion realizes they're being followed and that someone has their eye on our protagonist. Rin states that there are no new orders, and that they should continue observing and then eliminate the targets. The scene then cuts to our hero and his knight in front of a giant, dark canyon, and even finds the place very dark for midday, but is happy they found their objective. The 2 of them enter the mysterious place, and Alan is surprised that it actually exists, since it was a rare find in the game. The truth is, he went south using the ball as an excuse so he could explore this place, called the Labyrinth of Whispers, where whoever solves all the riddles in its 8 rooms receives a very powerful artifact as a reward, which our hero already knows what it is and how to get it. He memorized all the routes and puzzles, and now it's time to use his gamer skills. Seeing the labyrinth entrance in real life is different, even though he's run this dungeon countless times in the game. Ivan asks how he knows about this place, and our guy replies that he's been here many times. Our hero realizes what he said and plays it off, saying he has his ways, and calls the knight to enter. Inside the labyrinth, we see several monsters being brutally crushed. Then a giant stone hand appears along with several flying bats, and our hero warns that if you get the puzzles wrong, these things will attack without mercy. Ivan gets tense with the danger, but our guy focuses on the mechanism, while his knight wonders how his master can stay so calm in this situation, and remembers Alan's strange missions like saving orphans and helping slaves. In the meantime, our protagonist has solved the puzzle, but says the door will only open when the mechanism is complete. Even with all this mystery surrounding Alan, Even follows him, because everything his master does ends up working out in the end. Alan, for his part, was completely exhausted by all this, and had to crane his neck to avoid looking at the traps, otherwise he would have fainted from fear. Finally, the challenge is over, and they arrive in a room full of shiny treasures, but our hero ignores everything and tells them to just grab the black ring and leave, but Even thinks the ring is useless, so Alan tells him that taking the rest would only bring trouble. With the ring in hand, he has likely obtained the Oath of Restriction, and with that, it's time to head back, so he tells Evan there won't be any danger on the way out, but Even doesn't quite agree. Still, Alan walks out calmly, thinking it was easy because he knew the game's route, until Evan calls out to him, and asks if there have always been stone golems there, drawing his sword right after, planning to get his master out of there no matter the cost, but our protagonist steps forward and decides to handle it himself, surprising the knight. At that moment, the golems awaken with their red eyes and charge to attack, and one of them attacks Even, who yells that his second-level magic isn't enough. Our hero then raises his hand with the ring and invokes the Oath of Restriction, and an intense light emanates from Alan as he unleashes the power of the newly acquired artifact. This transports into a cosmic place where a voice asks him to state 2 restrictions. Our guy is startled, because in the game it was a choice window, not a voice, even though a voice makes a lot more sense. Then the entity explains that it is the Oath of Restriction, an artifact that allows the user to impose restrictions on themselves in exchange for more power. Anyone who's seen Hunter x Hunter gets the idea. Alan finds the voice much more convenient and prepares to make his oath. The mysterious voice then orders our hero to state his first restriction, and he says that he will always perform the Babylonian hand signs when using his magic. The entity then asks what wish he wants in exchange for this limitation, and our hero asks for the power to bend the laws of the world a little more, and the wish is granted. The young man then prepares to make his second restriction to the mysterious artifact, and with his hand in front of his face, he concentrates to do so. Then he says that when using magic, he will strictly chant the words of Babylon. The cosmic entity then asks what wish he wants in exchange for this new restriction, and our protagonist asks for even greater power to challenge the laws of the world. However, the entity remains silent and does not respond to his request for extra power, leaving the young man confused and wondering if he did something wrong, since he even mimicked the skills icon. He knows that with these 2 restrictions, he can achieve the highest magical attack power. Then finally, the power is granted, and the artifact accepts his oath. The voice finally thanks him for remembering the gestures and mysteries of the forgotten god, and thanks him for inheriting this wish, something Alan doesn't understand. In the end, he returns to reality without his question being answered, but the ring is absorbed, and the restriction is successfully applied. But before anything can happen, the entity says it will always be watching him, and at that exact moment, the golem attacks Even from behind. Even yells that the master's second-level magic won't be enough to defeat the monster. However, even as he tries to warn our hero, it's too late, and the golem is about to strike, but Alan just stares it down. He creates a magical sphere, but it looks pretty weak even with all his mana. However, no matter how much he trains, this is his power limit, and that's why he decides to test his new ability. It's time to use the restriction he made and see the price he'll have to pay for it. And concentrating his mana, he utters the word refraction, and immediately his power begins to surge. Then he says, repercussion, and the magic expands with much more force. With that, a gigantic light illuminates the entire cave and blinds his knight. And then he yells, blue light, and the sphere of magic begins to release beams in all directions. Then he begins to perform the Babylonian signs, channeling all that power into his hand, while reciting the name of his attack, linear diffraction. Launching a powerful beam, it hits the stone monsters and causes an explosion. Even is in complete shock at the absurd power his master has just used. Little by little, they are electrocuted by the magic, and they begin to fall, bowing before Alan, until they start to crumble piece by piece, leaving only rubble in front of our protagonist. Frightened, Evan asks what the heck that was, and then runs to ask his master if he was hiding his power all this time, to which he's told it's not quite like that. But the thing is, in 15 years of working as a mercenary, Evan has never seen anything like it, and he asks if his master is sure he's only in the second circle of magic. Our hero confirms that he is, and the knight is left speechless at that absurd revelation. He himself didn't know he had so much power and remembers that in the game, the ability wasn't nearly this strong. In the game, the combat system was turn-based, and a spell could be improved by using 1 enchantment at a time. The spell he used was Chain Lightning, which in the game required 4 enchantments to be cast. Thus, it was strengthened over 5 turns to reach that overwhelming level of power, the thunder blades would gather and be amplified to create a large-scale lightning spell. In exchange for the restriction that forced him to use an enchantment for every spell, he ended up gaining something extra. The result exceeded his expectations and surprised him, but calling it second-level magic seemed like an understatement. Exhaustion hits him, and he immediately sits down, because that was harder than actually fighting. Then he and even look at the labyrinth, and our guy wonders what kind of maniac designed such a terrible place. He then remembers that the Labyrinth of Whispers had another name in the game. The game's community called it the Labyrinth of Palan, because it had an owner, so Alan tells this to Ivan, who has no idea what his master is talking about. Then our hero says they need to go back west, because there's something they need to do when they return, and even comments that he's more careful than he looks. In the end, Alan ends up pushing the unmotivated husk of his knight, while thinking about how magic worked in the game, where choosing the right enchantments and symbols increased the spell's power. So he was already expecting this kind of damage, but in the game, the visuals didn't change, just a status increase would pop up on the screen. However, now, each combination alters the magic in a very visible and different way, and he wonders if his mana control is so good that he can actually see these changes. Either way, he decides to test it when his mana recovers, because in the end, everything worked out. Someone was then watching them from a distance. This figure is Rin, who followed him there and seems very determined to speak with him. The girl then skillfully leaps from a cliff to meet them. With that, she lands smoothly and stops in front of a script from the ancient Alanef Empire. She then removes her hood and begins to read the inscription, which says that the sword master Palan protected a friend who would be left alone. With a sigh, she touches the wall as she begins to explain the story of the great Palan. He was an emperor who repelled the invasion of dark creatures and defeated a terrible monster. Rin says she knows everything because she was born in the ancient library under a mystical sign. She confirms that Palan created the labyrinth and felt something strange about our hero. The girl says that Queen Blotbia was different from the stories, and she saw something similar in him. Rin is shocked that the great moon called Palan a friend worthy of reverence, and also realizes that the spell Alan used doesn't exist in any ancient records, and this makes her wonder who our protagonist really is. She then stands alone in the forest, processing all the information she's discovered. The girl understands that everything the Crimson Moon said was true and feels ashamed, until she senses someone approaching and turns to look, noticing that it was Macallion in a tree, and she asks if he got the information he needed. He replies that he didn't, but reports that the man in black has already been eliminated, and recounts that the target's neck spun around twice in the air in a very bizarre way, and Rin replies that she'll have to report the incident so they can handle the situation. Night then falls and they finally leave the place. The scene then takes us to Count Zenonia's house, where Kalia is in her room, thinking to herself that the rumors about our hero were true after all, remembering his cold, emotionless eyes that seemed like the bottom of an abyss, and recalling how surprised he was when she called him famous at the ball. Kalia remembers that Count Zenonia is very powerful and renowned in the underworld, but she finds it strange that someone who rarely socializes is so famous among people. And with this doubt in her mind, the young woman goes to her father and asks if he doesn't find her fascinating too. Count Zenonia just calmly replies that it's because she is the countess. After all, suddenly, Kalia releases red energy from her hand and points it at her own father. The sinister energy then reflects in the Count's eye and seems to control him, causing him to collapse onto the table right after, and Kalia reveals that she actually controls her father like a puppet, thus making herself the true leader of the house. But what really impresses her is the fact that Alan discovered the spies working for her. Suddenly, a guard runs desperately down the hall, calling her name. The man warns that she needs to go to her room as quickly as possible, and she obeys. And there, they find the body of a man who was mysteriously eliminated, with her guard stating that the seal preventing him from confessing anything was not activated. Kalia quickly realizes the body was left there on purpose, and with a smile she wonders once again how they discovered her plan, and worse still, they discovered exactly what her greatest weakness is at the moment. Meanwhile, our hero and Ivan are passed out on the sofa after going through the labyrinth. The scene then changes to the territory of the Duchy of Alchia, with a carriage arriving, and inside it Loria smiles and thinks that our guy is not someone to be underestimated, comparing his cold eyes to her father's, and under no circumstances should they be enemies. The worst part is that he was her last hope, but he ended up refusing to help her, which makes sense, since no one would accept a deal with so many losses, and due to her older siblings, she was left with nothing to offer. This makes her feel completely alone and hopeless, as she had nothing left in the world, and she has only survived this long due to her father's affection, and without him, she doesn't know what to do. Arriving home, a maid announces her return. The servant then runs and says that her siblings, Philin and Keeg, took their own lives, leaving Loria in complete shock, unable to believe what she just heard. That simply doesn't make sense, because people who would harm their own family wouldn't just do that to themselves. and in desperation, the young woman asks about her other siblings, Timalian and Marianne, but the servants panic and cry in fear, not knowing how to answer. It turns out they finished each other off. Loria looks at the scene and wonders what the heck is going on. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, someone jumps from the roof. This is Redan, the sin of misophobia, who smiles and says the target has been eliminated. He then sheathes his weapon and disappears into the darkness of the night after completing the job. Loria runs desperately down the hallway, but unexpectedly she freezes in shock as she remembers the words Alan said to her at the ball. She recalls him wishing her good luck and understands that he was just waiting for the right moment to act. The girl now realizes that our protagonist is the true shadow behind everything that has happened. With tears in her eyes, she finally understands what it all meant, and overnight, the young woman became the sole heir of the House Alchia. Alone in the hallway, she was completely terrified, wondering what kind of demon she'd gotten mixed up with, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. She had already seen examples of what happens to those who betray him, and knew she had no choice. Determined, she decides she can only move forward on the path she has chosen. 2 months then pass, and our protagonist receives a visitor. A butler enters and announces that a gift has been brought on behalf of Duke Alchia, which surprises Alan. Evan is shocked to see the Cernax wine they brought as a gift. The knight explains that each bottle costs thousands of gold pieces, and he's never even seen one before. Our protagonist reads the letter and sees it was sent by Loria, and he feels a pang of guilt, and he asks if the gift is really for him, and the servant confirms that it is, leaving him in shock, especially when he realizes that she has become the new Duchess of the House of Alchia. Meanwhile, she stretches, thinking that the last 2 months have gone by like a whirlwind, and recounts that after her father's passing, she held the ceremony and became the new Duchess. With her alibi from the ball, she avoided suspicion despite the sudden demise of her siblings. However, the family's secret organization was also eliminated by her siblings, so she's now completely powerless, and it was indeed a great surprise to her how Alan used this to his advantage. At first, he refused her proposal without much thought, but he took care of everything perfectly right after. This makes her wonder just how many steps ahead of everyone he is. He most likely helped her because his plan required the Alchia family. However, even with all the power of her house, it still doesn't compare to him, and the only thing she possesses that he doesn't is her influence. She knows the Alchia name manipulates politics, and that's what our hero wants. Loria then stands still in the hallway, looking at the portraits of her eliminated siblings, and decides to focus only on what she needs to do, and very soon her benefactor will tell her what that is, and with a smile, she hopes the gift pleased him. Back at the Palatial mansion, the servant from Alchia takes his leave and exits the office, leaving our hero pensive because Loria, who was once under threat, is now the Duchess. A few months pass, and the story advances to 5 years before the start of the game. Our protagonist is walking down the hall when Evan appears, looking for him, but calls him young master. Then he corrects himself since Alan is now a count. Our guy thinks that being a count wasn't part of the plan, but he's gotten used to the luxury, and even hands him a letter from Yushia, which our hero receives with curiosity, and taking the opportunity, he asks if Evan has found out anything about who eliminated his brother Leo, and the knight replies that he hasn't, but they are investigating, then asking what his master's objective is now, because so far, it doesn't seem like he wants revenge for anything, but all that's going through Alan's mind are the differences from the game, possibly caused by his actions, and he just replies that he's preparing for unexpected events. Evan teases him, saying he sounded like a count, and our guy agrees. But changing the subject, looking at Yushia's letter, he wonders what she wrote this time. The letter says that everything is fine for now, and Makalian has gotten much better at his puppet show. And it also says that Seolrang has been playing a lot with her friends at the orphanage. Rin has been reading a lot, and Radon has developed a taste for gardening. The letters have become a familiar routine, and Alan smiles like a proud father as he reads them, until suddenly, he wonders how old they are now, and even gets curious about the question. The knight informs him that they are almost old enough to enter society. Our protagonist then imagines the happy children thanking him for raising them. But at the end of the letter, Yuchia thanks him for raising them but signs it as the 5 capital sins, which makes him imagine something closer to a mafia than happy orphans, and this makes him think it's time to let them go and follow their own paths. He doesn't need to watch over them anymore, so they can think about their futures, because now that they haven't become the sins, they can live in peace. In the original game, each one had a talent. Yuchia had the talent of destiny, Makalian the sword, Rin for study, Xiaorang for fighting, and Redan the apostle. If he takes that into consideration and puts them in the right place, they'll shine brightly, so he decides to give each of them a gift and starts writing. Time passes, and the mansion is covered in the snow of a harsh winter. Our protagonist finishes his work, and Evan, who was sleeping on the sofa, finally wakes up. The knight says goodbye and rushes out, leaving our hero alone in his office. Back at the orphanage, Yuchi announces that the new orders from their master have arrived. And with everyone gathered, she announces that this time he sent individual letters to each of them. Everyone gets excited, but Yuchi says that first, they need to read the previous letters to understand everything. The group is thrilled, because only she could read the letters before, but now everyone can. They read the letter and think it's just small talk with no important orders. Yuchi explains that he has been disguising his orders as normal conversations from the very beginning. The first order was for her to take care of the children and report everything that happened. She says that's when he entrusted the blue moon to her and chose each one of them. Yuchi warns that they need to understand the orders and carry out the missions perfectly. Radon then asks why they don't visit him or use a magical communicator. Yuchi says irritably that they just need to follow their master's orders. Makalian gets tense at her confidence, but agrees that he hasn't forgotten the orders. Seolrang then shouts excitedly that it's time to read the order from their great master. The whole group gathers in a dark corner of the orphanage to read the letters together. Makalian says his order is to go to Caliburn, the nation of knights, but Seolrang complains because she has to go to a desert. Raiden reveals that his destination is Raxus, the city of entertainment, and Rin is going to Larthania, the labyrinth city. With a smile, Yuchi says she's going to the holy kingdom of Rosario and asks what they understood from the orders. Makalian says he needs to become a knight and that the sponsorship will continue as always. Radon adds that he also revealed the location of the gifts he promised. Yushia then tells the group to prepare for their departure and to follow the orders to the letter, and with a serious look, she reminds them not to mention the name of the blue moon to just anyone. The group then says goodbye to the orphanage and sets off to carry out their new missions. We then see them walking together to start a new phase of their lives. 3 months later, our hero is in his office, surrounded by piles of books, and he sighs in frustration as he hasn't found anything about the changes in magic and spells. He asks about the investigation into Leo's passing, and even says they haven't found anything. Our hero thinks that the butterfly effect of his actions has gotten completely out of control, remembering that Loria, who was supposed to be gone, became the Duchess and is expanding her power. With this, he decides to stop the investigation, and Ivan is very surprised by the order. Alan thinks that in this scenario, ignorance is a blessing, and if he digs too deep, he might just find his own grave. He believes that secret organizations won't attack him if he doesn't mess with them. With that, he decides it's not worth continuing and tells Ivan to stop the investigation. The knight then reports that Makalian was knighted in Caliburn, and our hero is pleased. 3 months later, Ivan arrives with several snacks and reports that Makalian has created an order of knights. Our protagonist is shocked, as this means he's an expert or higher. It wasn't long ago that Makalian was knighted, and he's already reached this level of power. Ivan comments that people say in 10 years, he'll be the 5th knight master. 6 months pass, and the story advances to 1 year since the Sins left the orphanage. Ivan then enters his master's office and announces that he's heard some very recent news. The knight reports that Makalian has become a Sword of Caliburn and the 5th knight master. Our protagonist is in complete shock, as he was not expecting this news at all. He asks if only sword masters can become knight masters and even agrees. The scene then shows the 4 super powerful sword masters from the game. Ivan explains that Makalian is on the verge of becoming one, but hasn't created his derivation yet. He says that even so, Makalian received the title because he defeated the 4th sword in a duel. Our hero understands that they've been at war for a decade and lost a knight master. The knight says that perceiving and moving mana takes 15 years, and derivation takes decades. The first sword master, Reinhardt, only achieved the title at the age of 32. He was a character in the game who was accepted as a temporary ally in the story, and even though he was very strong, it took him 20 years to get there. He then wonders if he can take advantage of Makalian sooner than he expected. Our guy is unsure whether or not he should use Makalian's power for his own ends, remembering that he only receives letters from Yushia and has no direct contact with the others. Her letters contain news about the other Sins, and it seems they keep in touch. Our hero thinks that they've never seen him, but they could at least thank him for the gift, but pulling himself together, he decides he's just happy they haven't destroyed the kingdom. Looking out the window, he says he's happy as long as they're doing well. The scene changes to the capital of Caliburn, the residence of a high-ranking noble. We then see the grand mansion of the illustrious Solar Eclipse Knights training. Makalian is standing near the window of a large hall with a very thoughtful expression. He is the captain of the Solar Eclipse Knights and the youngest knight master, until suddenly, he sees a girl in a white dress walking through the mansion's garden. She calls him brother and waves with a very cheerful smile, and he waves back at her while smiling. Right after, he regains his composure, remembering a year ago when he lost everything to some shadow creatures, and recalling that his sister had been taken by the darkness. While he could do nothing, she was swallowed by the shadows, and the only thing left for him him was rage. This made him feel an uncontrollable anger. In the end, he ended up in a dark cell, remembering all the hatred he felt that day. He holds a pendant and thinks that the great moon saved him, but that wasn't enough. The girl promised he could have his revenge, and that's why he followed the Blue Moon's orders. As a member of the Blue Moon, he went through dangerous missions and intense training. He didn't care about his own well-being and fought for years to prepare for his revenge. Then he remembers the personal order he received and how strange it all seemed. The letter told him to go to a small hotel in the south of Caliburn and pick up a gift. He wasn't excited about the gift and entered the hotel, not knowing what to expect. The young man looks inside the hotel and wonders what could be waiting for him. Suddenly, he sees a girl and runs towards her with a look of pure surprise. The Great Moon's gift was the chance to see the girl he thought he had lost. He hugs her tightly and can't believe he's seeing her again. The family he thought he had lost forever was right there in front of him, alive. The young man cries with joy, for she is more precious than his own life. He hugs his little sister, whom he thought was gone, and feels whole again, and with tears in his eyes, he asks what happened to her after they were separated. The girl cries with happiness and says that after she was taken, she was imprisoned. The two then sit down to talk, and she continues to tell her tragic story. She reveals that after being dragged away by them, she waited for her turn in the darkness, and was trapped in a tower for a long time, waiting for the day of her demise. But right when she was about to be eliminated, a hooded figure appeared to save her. She says she managed to escape in the middle of the light and luckily survived. However, a few years later, she was almost sold to a slave trader, but a man appeared and cut through the shadows, saving the girl from that place. She says that a mercenary named Even saved her from that nightmare, and says that after that, she received medicine and support from a mysterious sponsor. The girl then shows the letter that tells her not to worry about anything. She says she is very grateful for everything Alan Palacio has done for her. Macallion is shocked and wonders how the Great Moon knew all of that. He never told anyone, and Yushia only realized that the black goat had gotten her, and with a dark expression, he realizes that his master knows absolutely everything. Suddenly, all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, and he understands. He didn't understand Yuchia's anxiety, nor the fact that she was just a sword. But in the end, he was the fool for not understanding his master's plan. He remembers a phrase Alan said to him, and even a long time ago, our hero already knew everything and gave him a hint about his sister. The girl then calls his name, and he snaps out of his thoughts. With a smile, he says that his sword dared to act on its own, but his master was generous and decided to be merciful to him. While he only thought of hatred and revenge against the black sheep, the survival of his family was a priceless gift. He finally understands why Yusha follows that man with such loyalty. She wasn't just a fanatic, nor did she trust him blindly. With a new determination, the young man decides he needs to return the favor. His mission is to become the Night Master and create an order for his boss. A knight then approaches and informs him that it's time to leave. This expedition will be the first step for the Order of the Solar Eclipse. He doesn't care about the difficulties that lie ahead, because he awaits the day he can repay his debt and prove his worth. The Knights of the Solar Eclipse set out to fight against the barbarians. Meanwhile, our hero relaxes and finds everything very peaceful around there, until suddenly a gust of wind sends all his papers flying, and he panics, trying to grab everything before it's too late. Our guy looks at his notes, complaining about his cursive handwriting. He remembers that after returning from the labyrinth, he focused on researching the phrase, and in the end, it seems our hero liked the results of his research. His reports are ready, and he notes that each phrase changes the magic. Refraction strengthens the magic's imperfection, increasing its range. Next, he notes that repulsion crushes the spell's form. This affects the transition of the fired projectile and changes its state. Blue light, on the other hand, reinforces parallel magics like those of electricity. That's why the lightning spell was so strong and powerful that time. Linear diffraction ensures penetration, which causes a critical effect, which means the attack pierces the enemy more easily. With his mana, he can only use one spell a day, which has slowed him down. The Babylonian signs have been forgotten, and there's nothing written about them, so he had to research everything himself and ended up having fun. And now it's time to see the results of 2 months of experiments. He begins to make the hand signs he learned from Babylon. With this, he concentrates his mana and creates a sphere of electrical energy. The weak and useless magic eliminates the sphere's focal point and causes an imbalance. Then he uses the word fixation, and the sphere begins to stabilize. Soon after, he uses the word compression, and the energy sphere shrinks. Then he uses the word collapse, and the energy begins to go out of control. And with a certain purpose, the magic begins to manifest in a new way. Finally, he uses the word fleeting flower, and the energy takes the shape of a flower. With that, a column of blue energy rises to the heavens with immense power. Our hero realizes that the order of the words also matters a lot, because when he used the word collapse first, the spell failed, but suddenly someone says in disbelief that it's impossible. 2 people were watching everything. Kalia and her father look at the magic and wonder if that is the origin of everything. Our hero is confused and wonders why Kalia is there watching him. Her father says that origin magic can only be achieved by a 7th circle mage. Our protagonist doesn't understand the hierarchy of mages and wonders if he's that strong. The scene then changes to the reception room of the Palacio family with Kalia and her father. The young woman thinks that she had 2 clear reasons for coming to the Palacio mansion. She knows he has a card up his sleeve that could deal a devastating blow to Zenonia. Confirming Count Palacio's intentions was essential for her grand plan, but what she discovered was something completely unexpected and terrifying for her. Kalia can't believe that the arrogant mage is trembling with fear there. Bianchel was a 5th rank mage expelled from the tower for inhuman experiments. She has never seen him like this before and feels a deep terror coming from him at that moment. The girl then wonders if the magic she saw was really a powerful origin. With a confused look, she tries to process the information she just received. Suddenly, our hero enters the room and surprises the 2 unexpected visitors. He then asks with a serious look what brings them to his property. Kalia apologizes for the sudden visit and for the discourtesy. Kalia says she got lost while trying to find him and apologizes. With a firm look, he says he's going to make one thing crystal clear to them. He reveals that the magic he used was not an origin, leaving them completely shocked. Our hero says that if he had to classify it, it would be 2nd rank at most. He then warns them that it's better if they keep what they saw that day a secret. Bianchel agrees, stuttering, and Kalia is shocked to see him use honorifics. Our hero sits down relieved and asks the real reason for their visit. Kalia says they were nearby and decided to pay their respects to him. With a serious look, our protagonist says he has work to do and can't talk. The young woman then stands up and thanks him for the audience, preparing to leave. Our guy then suggests that she visit Duke Alcia if she wants to talk. He says he feels the 2 of them would get along very well, leaving the girl thoughtful. With a determined look, Kalia decides she will indeed pay the Duke a visit. She curtsies and says that perhaps she will visit the Duke soon. The carriage then departs and our hero watches from the door of the Palacio mansion. Ivan asks why a family from the west would come looking for them, and our guy doesn't know. He thinks that if the rumors spread, he'll have a lot of problems with other nobles. Our protagonist then walks with Ivan and explains that there's no reason for the alliance. With a tired look, he warns his knight not to seek him out alone again. The scene then shows Kalia's carriage heading towards the city of Rodmil. Inside the carriage, Kalia asks if the magic was really a powerful origin. Bianchel denies it and says his reaction was because of what he saw with his eye. He explains that origin is a privilege of the supreme and immutable archmages. The mage says he activated his eye of observation and saw our hero's magic. He says the fabric of reality was being torn and that he was twisting the principles. Bianchel yells that our hero was fixing a beam of light in place and distorting the laws. He despairs because our protagonist was successfully maintaining the spell. The mage says that it was a miracle that defies reason and left him shocked. Kalia then realizes the gravity of the situation and the absurd power he possesses. With his eye glowing, the mage sees the true nature of our hero's magic. He sees a giant red eye and a dark energy that terrifies him. Bianchel recognizes the work of a great forgotten god and despairs completely. The mage puts his hands on his head and says he needs to stop thinking because it's dangerous. He warns Kalia not to oppose Count Palacio and not to become his enemy. The young woman understands that there's no point in trying to discern our protagonist's intentions. She then decides that maybe it would be better to visit Duke Alcia, as he suggested. Kalia then realizes she has already become one of his pawns. 5 months later and 2 years since the children were sent out on their own, Ivan enters his master's office with a serious expression on his face. Our hero asks if there's any news about the children he saved. The knight reveals that the county of Zenonia and the ducal house of Alcia have formed an alliance. Our protagonist thinks that the Shadow Alliance will make the kingdom of Asteria collapse. He wonders if Kalia really took his words seriously that day. He remembers suggesting the visit to Duke Alcia and didn't expect it to work out. Our guy thinks that with Kalia's personality, a permanent alliance is impossible. Even so, he decides to prepare in case the alliance is real. He then begins to write a letter of apology to Kalia for his rudeness. After a while, Alan gives the letter to Evan and asks him to deliver it through the guild. He wonders what Radon and Sealrang are doing since they've disappeared from Yuchia's letters. Our protagonist worries about Sealrang and wonders if she might have been killed. He remembers the letter he sent and the gift that could turn her into a Baba Yaga. The sacred beast of the Golden Mane tribe increases the critical hit chance by 20%. Our hero thinks that with her talent, she could manage and make a living. The scene then changes to the desert nation called Colony, where strength is everything. We then see a dark cave in the middle of the desert with a light at the end. Sealrang walks through the cave and sighs sighs with relief for having reached the end. With a cry of joy, she celebrates that the ordeal is finally over for good. She then thanks the Great Moon for the gift and equips the golden gauntlet, and realizes that the essence of the tribe was not just a charm, and understands that the stories she heard as a child were all true. The scene then shows the Lord of the Golden Mane tribe on his golden throne. One of the tribe members explains that they are descendants of the kings of all beastkin. The essence is a legendary heirloom that grants divine power and authority to whoever wears it. Sulrong then obtains the essence and prepares to use her new power. She faced all the challenges in her inner world to obtain it. She understands that all of it was real, and that she now has a new purpose. Sulrong remembers the day she was dying as a test subject, but the savior from the lineage of the Great Moon saved her life and gave her power. With a determined look, the girl decides she needs to return the favor. She then releases a golden energy from her body, and realizes that the gift isn't for her to be an ordinary gladiator, but to become the greatest gladiator of all. Thus, she will reunite the tribe and restore its glory to eliminate the Black Dragon. She then prepares for battle and says she will kill the dragon. Then she walks through the desert with a new purpose in her life, and looking up at the moon, she says that all of this is for her great savior. Excited, she says that now it's time to begin her journey. The Golden Mane tribe will finally be reborn under the blue moon after 500 years. The scene cuts to the office, and even informs Alan that there's news from the Information Guild about the children he saved. He reports that Sulrong is doing well in the colony and has earned the nickname Golden Flash for her skills. Alan finds the name familiar and remembers hearing it somewhere before learning she's okay. Sounds like Minato, he thinks. Wait, wrong anim again. Then he asks about Raiden, and even says there's been no news from him since he went to Raxus, but the guild is investigating. Our guy then looks at his knight and asks if he shouldn't be busy, which leaves Evan quite confused. Alan informs him that he needs to get ready because it will take them a month to get to the magic tower, and the knight is shocked. Our hero apparently forgot to mention it and even sighs, as he's already used to his master's surprises. After that, the knight comments that the green magic tower is a week away, and Alan says they're going to the blue tower, which is farther. With that, Even accepts the order and prepares for the trip. Our guy throws himself on the sofa, tired just from thinking about the journey, but he knows he needs the item for his mana. He then remembers the Labyrinth City and the memories he has of spending hours playing in that place. The Labyrinth is a map in a psychedelia where players can get high-quality items. Although many players have explored the labyrinth, none of them have managed to reach the end. Our hero remembers a forum where a player used a trick to get to the 150th floor, and there were still many more floors. Just like in the game, the place is full of powerful relics and artifacts waiting to be found. Because of this, the job of a magic appraiser became very popular and guaranteed a life of luxury for those who pursued it. And speaking of which, Rin would soon be taking the exam to become an appraiser, and with her talent, she would pass with flying colors. He worries that the current Rin might be weak and decides he'll give her some extra support if she needs it. The scene then takes us to the Labyrinth City of Larthania, a place for explorers and mercenaries. Past several shops in the corner of the city's southern area, there is a secret appraisal shop. The shop's name is Murd, and it gained fame by serving nobles and A-rank explorers. A man then smiles and says the appraisal is finished, and this guy was the Lord of Larthania. Rin then hands an item that ignites with mana to the client, who thanks her. The Lord gets excited when he sees it's a relic that can be imprinted and asks about its ability. She explains that a small amount of mana keeps the flame lit for an hour, and the client is very happy with its efficiency. The Lord then thanks her for the service and leaves the appraisal shop. Alone in the shop, the girl sighs in relief and takes off her mask after a long day. She was lost in thought with a serious expression on her face, until suddenly she remembers something and turns to an item that was on the counter. She picks up the item and realizes the telescope can also be imprinted, just like the previous one. The reason Rin's shop is so famous is that imprinting items is a special service. This imprinting ability is a gift from the Great Moon that our hero gave her. She remembers that she didn't understand the reason when he sent her to be an appraiser, but she knew his identity was that of a friend of Palon, and that their goal was to eliminate evil. But the order to go to the Labyrinth City and become an appraiser made no sense to her, as she wondered what appraising items had to do with fighting against dark things. However, the moment she saw the gift he left, everything became crystal clear. The gift was the Eye of the Pursuer, an item that helps identify things, but this one seemed different. Looking closely, she realizes the item's substance doesn't exist in the library, so she decides to break the seal. The chains shatter, and the artifact's outer shell begins to crumble before her eyes. With that, the item reveals its true form, another hacked follower for our protagonist. And, after the seals were broken, the mark was finally unlocked. And now, for her to be able to fight against evil, the item needs to be awakened. It turns out this was an ability that required sacrifices to be fully strengthened. She realizes she still needs 252 sacrifices to awaken the item's full power. In exchange for increasing the relic stats, the eye absorbs something from her, changing its essence. She understands that the item only reacts to high-level relics, and if she messes up the sacrifice, the accumulated power vanishes. She then realizes that only she can do this because she was born with the Library of Eternity and has the necessary knowledge. All of this is to eliminate the Black Wolf and follow the will of the Great Moon who saved her. 3 weeks pass and our hero arrives at the Blue Magic Tower, but unexpectedly, the Tower Master is not there. A blue-haired woman greets them and introduces herself as Fenia, the Vice Master of the Tower. She then tells them to hurry up and say what they want because she's busy. Our protagonist recognizes her from the game and remembers she was a genius who became the Tower Master. The Magic Tower is not only powerful but also monopolizes essential goods, holding the status of nobility. He thinks that although she is extremely talented, her attitude is a bit over the top, but he decides to ignore it and introduces himself as Count Palacio, and then says he came to talk about the Time Gate, but she pays him no mind and focuses completely on her work. But after he says he can eliminate the Time Gate, Fenia is completely shocked. The Time Gate is a rift to a subspace that appears where a lot of magic is used and causes significant damage. She then uses a magic eye to analyze him and scoffs at how low his talent is. Then she tells them both to leave, leaving our protagonist confused by her reaction. Angrily, she says he only wants to eliminate the gate to get the treasure and accuses him of being greedy. And then she slams her hand on the table and shouts that she doesn't believe him because many have tried. Our guy feels wronged and just asks her to guide him to the gate to prove he's telling the truth. But she doesn't believe him and accuses him of just wanting to change public opinion about himself, since people are saying he only became a count by luck due his brother's passing. Losing her patience, she releases a powerful aura and warns that she will not tolerate any nonsense in her territory. Alan is then surprised that she knows about the rumors, and looking at her, he gets scared in the face of such power, even warns our guy that they'll be in big trouble if they try to fight her. But our hero is desperate and says he'll give up everything if he fails the mission. He says he will make an oath because the offer is too good for her to refuse. She then leads him to the door of the Time Gate and reminds him of the oath he made. She then observes him and wonders if he's a genius from the county or just a lucky guy, but she concludes that after listening to him, she realized he's just a lucky incompetent, because with his small mana pool and low talent, he won't be able to do anything useful. The truth is, the gate disappears on its own in 3 months after spitting out a relic. However, the gate at the Blue Magic Tower has been causing problems for over 2 years. Fenia then warns that if he can't do anything, he can simply leave the room, but she finds it strange because he's going to use his hand and not a staff, as the method he's using is almost a fairy tale. She then gets annoyed and tells him to stop pretending and leave the magic tower, but suddenly, thanks to the power of the restriction, the atmosphere changes abruptly. Fenia then panics when she realizes she can't move and notices that everything around her has stopped. So she uses her magic eye to see what's happening. Suddenly, she notices a giant red eye in front of Alan. The entity then stares at Fenia, who is terrified by the overwhelming pressure of that being. The entity's crushing pressure completely freezes time and space around Fenia. She panics as she realizes she can't move a single muscle and that everything around her has simply stopped. Out of pure instinct, her eye of observation activates in an attempt to understand what was happening. But what she sees is a gigantic cosmic red eye staring back at her, a sight that defies all her understanding of magic. With her ability, the mage tries to penetrate the essence of that unknown power, analyzing its structure to understand its origin. She soon realizes that this is not ordinary magic but a forbidden and dangerous power, like a poison chalice. The cosmic entity seems to notice the mage's analysis and focuses its attention directly on her. With that, a giant reddish hand forms in the air and moves toward her as if to punish her for her audacity, and then it asks her to be absolutely silent. Breaking out in a cold sweat, the mage finally understands the demand of that force and realizes she shouldn't have tried to peek at something so grand. The entity's gaze remains fixed on her, an overwhelming presence judging her for her reckless actions. The genius mage, for the first time in her life, feels true fear and accepts her smallness before a power of a divine level. With her submission, the overwhelming pressure begins to fade, and the environment slowly returns to normal. Alan then says that the time gate has finally closed, while thinking that for him, it was a piece of cake because he just needed to use some special items and methods to get the artifact from the gate. Our hero explains that he used a plausible sounding magic because he'd need it other times and wonders if he managed to fool the mage. Stuttering, Fenia agrees not to say anything to anyone, which leaves our protagonist confused by her expression, wondering if his bluff failed. He tries to say that she doesn't need to worry so much about it, but Fenia interrupts him. and swears that her lips are sealed and that she will keep the secret, no matter the cost. Our protagonist is left completely baffled by her sudden and exaggerated reaction. With little patience for the girl's craziness, he calls for his knight, Evan, so they can get out of there. Phineas stops him at the last second and asks him to wait a moment. With that, she opens a case and offers mana recovery potions that she made herself as a gift. The Count takes one of the vials, and is quite surprised to realize the potions are of the highest quality. The mage asks if he liked them, and Alan thinks about the absurd price of those potions, since just 2 of them are worth the price of a mansion. Our hero wonders why she's so grateful just for him closing the gate, but the mage says she will keep what he demanded a secret. To prove her loyalty, she even suggests making a mana oath, leaving our protagonist and Ivan jaw dropped at the idea. At that moment, the young man realizes there's been a gigantic misunderstanding in this whole situation. But before he can explain anything, Phineas already begins the ritual for the oath. In response, a huge magic circle appears with blue chains that bind them in a powerful mana oath. A frightened Phineas says she keeps her promises, while Alan just awkwardly agrees, realizing the misunderstanding has only gotten worse. And so, at the blue magic tower, after an inexplicable oath, he got 5 mana potions and the artifact he wanted so badly. Back in the carriage, Evan asks if that bracelet is the treasure that came out of the gate and thinks it looks pretty plain for something so hard to get. Our hero then puts the item on his wrist and replies that regardless of its appearance, it's something he really needs right now. It turns out the artifact is called the Mark of the Impure, and its gem absorbs and stores mana from the atmosphere to be used later. And even without a huge storage capacity, it's still way more than Alan's minuscule mana pool, because his body has less mana than any random support item. But he quickly recovers, remembering that his goal is to research magic and preserve himself, not go around fighting, and he convinces himself that the item is more than enough for his plans, and he wonders what kind of misunderstanding Phineas had to act in such a weird and exaggerated way. Our protagonist remembers how she suddenly became super polite, practically pushing them into the carriage. To try to clear things up, he said he was just a second circle mage, but she agreed with such enthusiasm that he thought she was making fun of him. Alan thinks for a moment and realizes her reaction was very similar to Kalia's the last time they met. Both women, who were super arrogant, suddenly became terrified and submissive, which gives him a very strange and uncomfortable feeling. In the end, the protagonist decides not to sweat it, because he'll probably never see either of them again. As the carriage travels through a quiet, sunny landscape, our hero and his knight comment on how pleasant and peaceful the weather is. The scene then takes us to the imposing Duchy of Alchia, where an unexpected visit is about to take place. Inside, Lori Alchia receives her guest, wishing Lady Zenonia a comfortable stay. With a smile, Kalia thanks her for the reception and says she's happy to see her, as the House of Alchi is the same as ever. The red-haired young woman comments that their relationship is comfortable because they don't need to measure power, and once again, she is surprised by Count Palatios' foresight. She remembers Alan's words, casually suggesting that maybe she should pay a visit to Duke Alchia. Upon following that advice, Kalia quickly realized the hidden meaning behind that simple suggestion. As the two talked and walked through the garden that night, they realized a shocking truth. Both powerful leaders of the underworld were, in a way, under the influence and control of our protagonist. Their alliance was formed by an indirect order from Alan, and in the face of such absolute power, any dispute between the two would be futile. Because of this, the houses of Zenonia and Alchia, which were once rivals, ended up developing a much more peaceful and cooperative relationship. Back in the present, Loria mentions next month's conference and asks Kalia the reason for her visit that day. Lady Zenonia reveals that the Count sent a letter, using the day of her visit as a pretext, and Loria becomes curious about its contents. The letter begins with a formal greeting and mentions that some nobles complained to him about the events of her visit. Then he explains that because of this, there aren't many nobles he gets along with and hopes she gets the message. Callie explains that the letter might seem like a simple apology at first glance, but Loria understands that there is certainly a secret order hidden between the lines of the text. Lady Zenonia smirks and agrees that it would be a good idea to discuss what their master really means by that. With that, they analyze the phrase about not getting along with many nobles and recall the important figures from the aristocratic and loyalist factions who were at the ball. This analysis leads them to the conclusion that he doesn't like either side, and they wonder if the order is to eliminate everyone. However, Duchess Alchi suggests that they reach a conclusion within reason, and Kalia accepts the proposal. From there, the two arrive at the same interpretation, that Alan's real plan is to overthrow the current nobles to create a new regime. Loria finally understands that this was the reason he needed the prestige of the Alchia family and helped her become the new duchess. And Kalia confirms that the theory makes perfect sense because, with her help as the ruler of the West, his plan is foolproof. Satisfied with their interpretation of the facts, the two prepare to discuss the details of the plan they will execute. Meanwhile, at the Blue Magic Tower, the Tower Master questions Feeney about Count Palacio managing to close the time gate. The Vice Master confirms the story to her superior, and he asks her to tell him everything in detail, and so, the puzzle pieces that Alan scattered fit together on their own, creating a completely different picture than he imagined. Changing scenes in a very distant place, the protagonist suddenly chokes violently. Ivan asks him if he's okay, and our guy replies that he choked on a sweet potato, maybe because it was chestnut-flavored. Even while choking, the young man comments that the sweet potato was delicious while his knight offers him some water. Looking at the sunset, he says he wants to get home soon and thinks that Yuchia's letter should be arriving any day now. In the meantime, the scene changes to a holy kingdom where bells are ringing as a hooded figure watches the city from a balcony. This figure is Yuchia, who, now with the look of a nun, maintains her usual sinister and confident smile. The city in question is Lionel, the capital of the holy kingdom of Rosario, a white and pure place that worships the goddess of the moon and peace, Saronia. The exact location is the Eastern House of Prayer, and a knight approaches her. The knight introduces himself as Lord Locke and formally greets her as sister. Yuchia returns the greeting with a smile and asks if he has been well. The knight thinks that a nun of such a low rank, who doesn't even wear the stole of holy grace, shouldn't receive so much respect. Even so, he treats her with the utmost reverence, bowing before her. He then says that thanks to her, he managed to save 8 children and 25 lives in a small village. With a humble smile, the girl replies that it can't be, for the good deed was all his, but Lord Locke insists, saying that she was the one who gave teachings to someone as insignificant as him, and for that, the knight will always be grateful for her help and guidance. At this, he remembers a dark past where for 20 years, he couldn't feel any divine power, and almost gave up everything in despair. He had dropped his sword on the verge of giving up being a knight, and he felt like a complete failure for not being able to awaken any power, until one day, Yudia appeared and said that if he desperately wished for something, he should try believing in the moon. Locke was confused by those words and questioned what the moon had to do with divine power, and Yushia replied that he would know if he truly believed. From then on, the desperate knight thought he had nothing to lose and decided to follow that bizarre advice. He prayed to the moon for a few days and miraculously managed to awaken the divine power he so desired. At first he was overjoyed, but guilt soon hit him when he realized he had worshipped the moon instead of the goddess Saronia. He questioned if he had fallen into temptation and followed the path of heresy, trading his faith for power, but he soon realized that all power borrowed from a god felt the same, and the sacred artifacts shone in his hands. With this, the young man proved his divine power and became a respected knight within the kingdom. Now, before the one who guided him, he asks why she told him to believe in the moon. Yuchi explains that faith is something that comes from an invisible belief and takes a long time, but it's easier to obtain from something that exists tangibly. With that, the girl reveals that the path to power can be much more direct if the person knows what to look for. With her arms open towards the window, she finishes her reasoning by saying that the moon is always by his side. From that, the knight understands her logic, for since the goddess is also the moon, there's no problem in worshipping it directly. He realizes that for a human full of doubts, this is a way to believe with a little more certainty. Faced with that revelation, he bows in a gesture of deep respect and thanks the sister from the bottom of his heart. Back to the present, Yuchia says that if he truly wishes to express his gratitude in a more concrete way, he should pray with her at that very moment to show his devotion. Without hesitation, the knight accepts the invitation and replies that he will naturally do so with great pleasure. Yuchia, with a shrewd look, comments that it's conveniently time for prayer. So many people are gathered in the church. Thus, the two of them enter the church, and Yuchia begins to walk towards the altar. She then climbs the stairs, and then begins the sermon, and asks for everyone to pray together at that moment, and asks that they pray to the great and powerful moon. This is the nun of the Holy Kingdom of Rosario, Yuchia Bladia. Back at the Palacio Mansion, our protagonist is in his office reading a letter. He notices there's nothing special in it, just trivial updates on how the children are doing. With that, the young man rests his head on the table, because even though it's good to know everyone is living well, he can't hide a certain disappointment. The fact is, living well is great, but it's a bit lonely not receiving a single thank you letter from anyone except Yushia. Thinking about it differently, he kind of understands the situation, since to the children who have never seen him, he's just a kind and grateful gentleman. Thus, the objective of guiding them down the right path so they wouldn't destroy the world has been achieved, so there's no reason to feel sad. With that in mind, he tries to find his inner peace by repeating to himself that there's no need to be shaken by something so small. Besides, Yudia must be very busy, but she still takes the trouble to send a letter every month, which he greatly appreciates. Even so, the feeling that he raised 5 children and only the eldest acknowledges his effort leaves him heartbroken. well-spoken, but he tries his best to look fine. Suddenly, his knight Ivan appears out of nowhere, startling him, and asks if the count is busy with anything important. The knight explains that information from the guild about the children has arrived, and he was about to deliver it immediately. The information in question is about Raidan, the boy Alan had asked about the last time they spoke. To our hero's complete shock, Ivan reveals that the boy has simply become a pirate. Imagining he had turned into Luffy, Alan demands that his knight tell him the story in detail from beginning to end. Evan then begins his report, saying that first, the rumors about Seolrang and Macaullion are spreading everywhere. According to the information, Seolrang has already achieved 32 consecutive victories out of the 100 needed to challenge the legendary gladiator, Baba Yaga. Our protagonist questions the number, as he remembers that the gladiator with the most consecutive victories is the Lion King, with 41. He remembers that the Lion King was an overpowered character who briefly joined the player as a companion in the game. The colony has individuals so strong that they rely on gladiators for their military power, and Seolrang might surpass that peak soon. Moving on to the next topic, Even talks about Macallion's Order of Knights and their recent achievements. His order managed to eliminate Curse of the Snow Fields, one of the 8 barbarian chiefs of the region. The knight explains that the barbarian chiefs are monsters who transformed into superhumans through rituals and asks if Alan knows them. Our protagonist confirms that he knows them very well, because in the game you had to fight against the barbarians and their god, Olboltus. He feels relieved that he won't have to face Olboltus again, since the god only appears if the 5 great sins descend, which he has already prevented. With a satisfied air, Ivan says there's no more need to worry about Macaullion, because with this incident, he's being treated on a level similar to Reinhardt, the first sword. Our hero wonders if he should have gone to see the children's real faces, since the advantages would be quite interesting. Ivan continues the report and says that Rin, who became an appraiser, is distributing black engravings that improve the abilities of artifacts. The protagonist then decides to change the subject, and asks if Radon really became a pirate. The knight begins to explain the situation and asks if his master has ever heard of the 7 archipelagos in the waters of Raxus, where the great pirates hide. With that, he became the captain who rules the first and largest of the archipelagos. Our protagonist completely freaks out at the news, because he sponsored the boy for years, hoping he would grow up without problems and live a normal life, but instead, he changed his class to pirate. With his hand on his head, he laments not having sent the young man to Raxus with that intention. The original plan was for Raidan to excel at enemy detection since he belonged to the rare sea god tribe and was free in the water. As the Sea of Raxus is full of precious artifacts, our hero recommended the profession of treasure hunter and even gave him a specialized gift for searching. But now, if he's a great pirate and captain, it's like he's the lord of the island, which means he's become a big shot. Alan then asks how Radon managed to deal with the captain of the first archipelago, because all the captains are superhumans, and the pirates of the 7 archipelagos never lose in naval battles. At this, the young man has an idea and wonders if the boy recovered the best ancient artifacts. He remembers investing a lot of time in the treasure hunter mini game to get super powerful items and imagines if Raiden used those items to take the captain's place. Our protagonist covers his face with his hand and thinks that, even though he knows nothing in the world goes as planned, this time the situation has a strangely bitter taste, like the heart of a father who ended up with a pirate son. The scene then changes to the heart of the Duchy of Korkia, the gigantic maritime city of Raxus. In the waters off its coast lie the 7 havens of the pirates. The greatest haven among them is the first archipelago, a prosperous and vibrant place. The former captain who ruled the place and received the protection of the celestial king through sacrifices, the great pirate Red Slayer, was defeated, and the one responsible for this feat was none other than Radan, the new captain of the first archipelago. With a thoughtful air, the young man tries to understand the situation he's gotten himself into. Sitting on top of a building, he scratches his head and admits that he simply can't understand, and wonders what the heck the Great Moon they all talk about is. Originally, he wasn't interested in the subject, so he never thought much about it. At first, he saw our protagonist only as a kind gentleman and was grateful for being saved, because if it weren't for him, he would have perished as a biological experiment slave. But instead, he met Yusha and developed his abilities. In fact, the Blue Moon's activities felt more like he was just following the girl's orders. But when a direct order from the Great Moon arrived, he realized that it made no sense at all. The order questioned if there was any meaning in becoming a treasure hunter, something he also didn't understand. Instead of accepting the order, he felt resistance because he had many scumbags he needed to get revenge on as soon as possible. His clan, which lived peacefully on an unknown island, was attacked by dark creatures, and those black things massacred them without mercy, destroying everything he knew. And the slave hunters took advantage of the situation, eliminated his parents, and sold him as a slave. With a look full of hatred, he remembers the pain and humiliation he suffered at the hands of those hunters. To him, the profession of treasure hunter or the gift he received had nothing to do with the promised revenge. Even so, he decided to at least pretend he was following the order to avoid raising suspicion. Suddenly, he hears a noise and sees a ship with fireworks approaching the coast. Looking closer, he notices several wanted posters with the faces of the captains of the 7 archipelagos. On the ship, the pirates are celebrating and having fun with a lot of partying and drinking. One of them lights a cigar and says that only the chosen great pirates can receive the protection of the celestial king through sacrifices. Until he saw the guys who eliminated his parents and realized that those things had finally obtained the power they so desired. But he knew that the story of a celestial king was a lie spread on purpose because their power came from a sacred ritual. It turns out that only through a ritual using body parts from the sea god tribe was it possible to receive the power of the sea god, Clyde. Even so, all the captains of the 7 archipelagos were using that power for their own ends. With a dark look, he realizes that those cursed hunters were behind it all. They took his parents' bodies, divided them into 7 parts, and shared the power among themselves. With his soul consumed by the desire for revenge, Raidan becomes completely furious. As fireworks light up the sky, Raidan watches the ship with the people who had eliminated his parents, and wonders how the Great Moon knew all of that, because he never told his story to anyone, and yet it seemed like everything had been prepared for him, as if the Great Moon had arranged the perfect opportunity for revenge to fulfill its promise. Even so, he knew he couldn't get revenge immediately, as his enemies were powerful. They were superhumans who wielded the power of the sea god, and it wouldn't be easy to defeat them. If by some chance all of this was intentional, then there must be a reason for the gift he received. The artifact specialized in searching. The Great Moon had arranged everything, preparing the board and the foundations for his revenge. With the gift in hand, he activates its power and promises that he will make his enemies pay for everything they did. The scene then changes to a paradisiacal tropical island, and Raidan was running at full speed. Right after, he leaps from a cliff and dives headfirst into the water. Underwater, the gift Raidan received begins to shine brightly, activating its hidden power. With that, the gift from the Great Moon, the Goggles of Abrita, manifests and reveals its true function. This artifact makes it much easier to discover other valuable items hidden in the depths of the ocean. In this way, he finds several specific artifacts that are more than enough to increase his combat power. After the underwater hunt, the young man emerges from the water and walks along the beach as the sun sets on the horizon. Stepping onto the sand, he realizes how foolish he was to just feel gratitude without understanding the depth of the plan. Looking up at the sky, Raidan understands that the Great Moon has fulfilled its promise of vengeance. The boy realizes that his master not only placed the targets right in front of him, but also gave him all the power necessary to carry out his revenge once and for all. With a confident smile, he finally comprehends the command in the letter and the true intention behind it all. His mission wasn't to be a treasure hunter, but to get revenge and take control of the 7 islands. He remembers Yuchia's words to never forget that all of this was for the Great Moon. The phrase that once seemed meaningless to him now took on a new significance. With the light of truth, that order, which was once empty, was now engraved in his heart. Determined, he says that all of this is for the Great Moon, and he begins to stare at the moon on the horizon. 3 months later, the summer heat is gone, and with the arrival of autumn, a grand social event approaches. Our protagonist was inevitably dragged into the event and complains about having to participate in something so boring every 4 years. Several noble carriages travel together on the road in a convoy for protection. Ivan reports that, as planned, the carriages of the Clyde and Edorn families have joined them on the journey. Alan finds this custom of traveling in a group to avoid bandits very weird and annoying. As night falls, they stop at an inn to rest from the long journey. Our hero is in a tavern, drinking peacefully, when he's accosted by other nobles. 2 guys start making fun of him for having only 1 guard, assuming his finances are in bad shape, and our guy realizes his problem isn't bandits, but other nobles. The nobles continue with their snide remarks, and the protagonist just wishes they would go gossip somewhere else. It turns out the Palacio family has always been known for being a bunch of scoundrels. Their power, which controlled the vast eastern underworld, was based on financial strength obtained through illicit means. Satisfied with the new reality, our hero has distanced himself from the underworld, and it doesn't really affect his livelihood these days. Because of this, some hungry wolves are eyeing his territory now that he has stepped away. The eastern underworld is being coveted by opportunists who want a piece of that pie. And with Alan's withdrawal, the rumors that he became a count out of pure luck have basically become an established fact. Our hero already knew about the baseless rumor of the dark hand behind his house, and that he had been demoted to a knave. Lucky person. The 2 nobles keep up their antics, pretending to cry over his lack of funds puns and offering help in a really mocking way, but the guy's mockery crosses the line and leaves our protagonist visibly annoyed with the situation, until suddenly he has an idea. Looking at the two of them, he wonders if this is the Palacio family victims support group. It turns out the Cloud and Adorn families were dragged around like fools by the Palacios in the past, and now they're unleashing all the humiliation they suffered back then on our guy. The protagonist gets irritated because he wasn't the one who used them in the first place, but he's taking the heat for it anyway. Suddenly, Even appears with a roasted corn and comments that the noble's efforts to get under his skin are admirable. Our hero decides that in moments like these, ignoring them is the best response and asks where his knight has been. Ivan explains that they were handing out roasted corn in the kitchen, and he took the opportunity to grab some. The two then sit down to eat and agree that simple crops are always delicious, especially on a cold night. The nobles don't give up and start an improvised rap, asking if he failed to manage the vast power of the underworld. Hearing that, our protagonist thinks their rhyming sounds like a song and continues eating his corn peacefully. While the nobles complain about the corn, our protagonist thinks it would have been better with butter. The scene then takes us to the north, an endless frozen land swallowed by barbarians. It's a place where only a cursed, grayish white exists, as if there were no life at all. One of the great barbarian chiefs is down in the snow, wounded and exhausted. With a cry of rage, he curses the scoundrels from Caliburn who left him in this state. For barbarians who revere battle, death in combat is honorable and glorious. But this was a dishonorable defeat, as he fell for a duel set up by a knight from Caliburn and suffered a cowardly ambush. With his body wounded and bleeding, he feels humiliated by his downfall. The barbarian chief known as Kurg of the Snow Fields is on the brink of death. Fallen in the snow, he wonders what happened to his people and his warriors. In his last moments, he laments the wretched end he has met, unable to close his eyes in peace. Bleeding and almost lifeless, he hears a voice in his mind. The mysterious voice calls to him and asks him to call out his great name, the name he revered, the name of his god. With his last breath, the barbarian calls out for Obultus. He then tries to use his last bit of strength to try to get up, and screams the name of his god with all his might, and begins to plead for him to appear, and says that he and his people dare to call upon your honored name for help. The god then finally decides to answer his call, and replies that he will gladly grant his wish.